the Norwalk Community Health
Uh-huh,
Center, and we are
uh-huh.
beneficiaries of
Oh,
the
that's
donations for
right.
this
That's
one. So yeah,
right. Very, very cool. Very cool.
it's a big deal for us.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I know that center. When did that place get incorporated? Like in the early 90s, right? Was that when
Hmm.
the,
Hmm.
right?
We are
Yes.
live.
We're live. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Finance Committee meeting. Today is March 13th, 2025, and the time is 6:03. Joining me is board member Diana Carpio. We are expecting Cara Nelson Bakey shortly, and also with us is MPS CFO, Mr. Lunda Asmani. First, I will entertain a motion to approve the February 12th, 2025 minutes.
I didn't see any changes or
Okay,
corrections.
thank you. So if there are no changes, we will pass the minutes as submitted. Are there any public comments on line? I don't think there's anybody on. If
Nope.
there are any email comments, they will be entered into the record. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Osmani to provide us with the FY25 budget and FY26 budget update. You're on, Mr. Osmani.
All right. I am going to share my screen.
Okay.
Can you see it,
Yes,
Dana?
I can.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start with the food services fund and then end with the general fund. I'll provide some additional detail. The food services fund, currently we approved a budget of 7.2 million. Right now, we're over halfway through. We're at 47% of the budget. Everything is trending as we anticipated. This is looking at the food services fund from the expenditure side. The major expenditures here are really our contracts with Chartwells. That's under professional and technical services. That's the big expense in this budget. And then we also have some salaries and benefits that are tied with this budget for people that work in our food services department. But everything on this side is trending as we anticipated, as it would. We're actually below year over year where we were this time last year. So we should be fine. The conversation we typically have around this are the revenue side of the equation. The Food Services Fund receives revenue sources primarily from federal sources, the Department of Agriculture that funds the school lunch program. That's where our revenues come in. With the uncertainties in revenues, we have not heard anything related to revenue flows for the Food Services Fund. So that's rather comforting for us. We do have some supplemental funding from the general fund that we transfer into this fund. We had budgeted to transfer in about $500,000 this year. We are looking at some enhanced other sources of revenues to come in, and I think we'll probably around that $500,000 mark when the year ends. So that will trend consistent with what we have in the budget. As far as the grants are concerned, we've had conversations about grants. This budget year, we have approved a budget of just over $35 million in grants. Our grant budget used to be a lot larger than this, obviously, when we were receiving ESSER funds. This is more along the norm of where our grants are. Next year's budget that we'll talk about next is going to be about $30 million because there was $5 million passed through the city and the board to communities that offer early child care services that are no longer coming through us, which is something that we actually agree with because it was causing additional reconciliation work on our part. So that's as far as what we know on the grants. We did get a little bit concerned earlier in the year when there was a memo from the administration related to federal grants. We received two federal grants directly. That is the MSAP grant, the $15 million grant for the Magnet School Assistance Program. And then we also have a smaller grant, a marine science grant. These are the only two grants that we get directly from the federal government. All the other grants come to us by way of the state. So far, we have been told not to anticipate any changes to those grants that are federal that flow through the state. But again, nothing is certain, so we are continually watching that. And then finally, I want to talk about the general fund, which is obviously the primary operating fund for the district. We are at 60.9% of the budget so far. We are about 68% in through the year. I'll walk over some of these major categories and kind of talk about the drivers. I'll combine salaries and benefits. These remain the largest expenditure categories within the operating budget. About 75% is salaries and benefits. As far as salaries are concerned, we're about 5.9% year over year over where we were last year. Our budget this year is slightly higher by about that much. Union contracts and those types of things. One of the things that we are seeing a trend this year, it's a good problem, bad problem, in that our turnover rates have actually substantially decreased. So we're ending the year a lot closer to the approved budget than we have in the past, because in the past we've ended the year with a bit of a surplus, largely attributed to turnover savings. And so this year we're not seeing the savings to that level. Benefits, same story. This year, we did reduce the benefit budget. You'll see that last year we spent 38.9 million in that first column. This year, we budgeted 35 million. There was a slight reduction. We had some additional surpluses in the health insurance account, and therefore this is trending similar to what we would anticipate it to be. About 51% of the year, we make quarterly transfers from the general fund into the health insurance account. So that's what's reflected in that year-to-date actual. The next category is professional and technical services. Professional and technical services right now are at 61% of the budget, 30% more than where we were this time last year. Among the drivers within professional services included in this line are when we pay substitute pay. We've contracted with an outside vendor, ESS, to provide substitute coverage. So when we pay for substitute teachers, we actually pay it out of professional and technical services and not out of salaries and benefits, because those are not our employees. Included in that professional and services line are also things like our security services contract that we have. We do have some outsourced security within the school system. We also have our nursing staff. Sometimes we also have coverage, and we do have an agency that provides nursing staffing the same way that they provide temporary teacher staffing. So that's included as well within this category. And then we also have special education professional services. These are contracts, third parties that come in and provide special education services to us by way of contract. And so these are paid out of professional services. So again, we're at about 61% year over year spend in this line item. Some of these professional services contracts we pay up front, and therefore that's why it shows that we're at 60% this year compared to where we were last year. Also last year, we were fortunate with some supplemental funding that we received from the city by way of grants. And so last year, we were able to pay quite a bit of our professional technical services using those supplemental funds that we got from the city. Those were in a separate account. This year, we're paying for these out of the general fund. And that's why you're seeing that year over year that we're 30% higher this year compared to last year, because last year we were paying these services out of other accounts. The property services is similar. These are things related to custodial services, maintenance of equipment. We have things like copier contracts throughout the district. And so that's what property services is at 10.2 million. And again, we're at 6.6 million, 6.8 million, which is where we would anticipate to be this time of year. The big one number here is other student services. Other student services budgeted at 24.2 million. We've already spent 18.5, almost 81% of our budget halfway through the year. The biggest driver here is our special education expenses. Out of district tuition is paid out of this account. Student transportation for regular ed, for general ed and special ed. We also have contracts with specialized services. Some of our students are in other educational districts. And then we also have contracts with third-party vendors that provide special ed services. And so this is the big driver. This is the one we're watching very closely. We knew at the beginning of the year that we would be about $2 million or so over what the budget was. Fortunately, as you may be aware, the state did approve supplemental funding that's going to come our way. We're going to get roughly, the estimates are just under 900,000 in excess costs. And excess costs provides us reimbursement for any additional special education services that we provide over and above 4.5 times our average per pupil spend. Historically, we have gotten about 70% of what we turned in that we would be eligible for. With this additional funding, we will be close to about 75% reimbursement. So it'll provide us another 900,000 or so. It still won't cover the gap, but it'll go a long way. So
And that's for
we're
this
good.
year? That's for
That
the
is,
current year? For the current year?
this is, yes, this is for the current year.
Okay.
We reached out to the state. We anticipate, we get the funding in 2 tranches.
Mm-hmm.
I think they promised us to get it around May timeframe,
Okay.
but it should come to us before June 30th, because if it
Okay.
comes to us after June 30th,
Right,
we
that's
wouldn't
next
be
year.
able to count it for
Right.
this year. So,
Right.
but
Right.
they've assured us we'll get that this year. So that'll go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other items, equipment, other objects or miscellaneous other items. And then you'll see on here, I mentioned the transfer to the food services fund at $500,000. We have not yet completed that transfer. That's why it's showing as 0%. We typically complete that transfer at the end of the year once we know what the activities in the food services fund and what the actual transfer amount should be in that account.
Okay.
So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have with related to the current year's budget before I talk about next year's budget.
So in the professional and technical, some of the items that you mentioned there were for third-party outsourcing. My sense is if that was internal, it would be costing us more money? Or,
Yes. Yes, it is. So we've entered an agreement, for example, with our custodians and our custodial union. As custodians retire from the district, we do an analysis to determine if it will be cheaper to outsource that service. And then once we make that determination, then that particular service is outsourced. That's how the contract was written. So it is, because we don't pay benefits or any of those things related to that. That's the same thing for our security services is now fully outsourced. We have a third party that does that, but we went through a similar process. It is cheaper for us to outsource
to do it that way.
Correct.
And with the subs, was the subs always part of a third-party outsourcing to get subs? I always thought that was internal for some reason.
I want to say for the past 5-6 years,
okay.
it's been outsourced. It's actually a
Right.
common trend within districts.
Right.
When it was in-house, this was managed through our HR department. So we
Right,
had
that's what I
somebody in HR. So,
Right.
you would call in, they would do the calling, and we were
Right,
really having issues getting people. And so we went to a third party, which has really worked. There's
More
still challenges
efficient.
just because of the shortage.
Right.
But it is more efficient to outsource it than to do it ourselves.
Right. Got it. Thank you, Linda. Does anybody else have any questions? Diana, are you good? I don't know if Kara jumped on yet. I'm not sure. I don't think she.
Yeah, I'm here, Sherry. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
let the record show that Kara Nelson Bakey is also in the meeting. So
Yeah, sorry, I'm late.
okay.
Linda, just any red flags at this point? Anything that we need to be like keeping an eye on?
In the current budget, well, we're watching special education. That
Yeah.
is something that we're watching closely. And then, as I mentioned, we don't have any transfers this month, but in the past, we've been making transfers to cover those excesses in special education. But I had shared at the beginning of the meeting, the salary savings that we've seen historically from turnover, we're seeing less of those because we don't have the
Right.
highest
Yeah,
level of
I did hear
turnover.
that. That's good.
That is
about
good.
turnover
And
time.
then also the people that we're bringing in, we're not necessarily bringing them in at that base level of pay.
Mhm.
Recently, we got an agreement with the teachers union to take private school credit as teachers come in because we were losing a lot of qualified individuals because we would not accept their years of service in
Mhm.
private schools. And so now that we're accepting that, then they're not coming in at the entry level because they're coming in with years of experience. So the
Mhm.
savings from the turnover has also diminished as a result of that.
Right.
And that was something that we wanted to do anyway, right? I mean, I know that was
Yes.
somewhere in some of our goals was to look at that and try to do a better job with retention. So that's good, but it costs more, right?
And then
So
the sped funding from the state, do
Yes.
we have an idea of when that's gonna like be dispersed?
They've informed us that we should get it by mid-May, but definitely before June 30th. So that will allow us to, it's the
Balance.
excess cost grant. And the way that we apply the excess cost grant is we charge special education salaries. So what that would do is special education employees that are charged in the general fund, we would be able to charge the grant fund and offset the cost in the general fund to allow us to pay for some of these other specialized special education services and costs.
Mhm.
Got it.
But we're hoping to get it before mid-May.
Okay, thank you.
Now,
Okay.
Linda, on the food services fund, the funds are already there for the full year? Or are we, with the cuts on the federal level, could we lose any of that?
With the food services fund, we have received about three quarters. They come to us in installments. There is one last tranche of funding that we typically get closer to the end of the year. Sometimes it even comes in July, but because it's for services for the year before, we're allowed to take credit for it in the year before. And that's one of the reasons why that transfer takes a while to do because we wait for that final one. What we have been told is that as long as the FY25 funds have already been appropriated, that they wouldn't be clawed back. And this is one also that flows through the state. So the funding that comes through the states has a little bit more of a safety than the funds that come directly to us from the federal government. And so at this point, even in talking with folks from the food services world, they're relatively confident that we will get this year's appropriation without any issues.
Linda, did you say that the money coming from the state to us is more secure than when we get it directly from them? Is that what you just said, or reverse?
The federal funds, yes.
Okay. I mean, when you talk about clawback, you see where New York City got money clawed back, and the judge ruled that they're not getting it back. I mean,
Correct.
I think that it's going to be investigated, I guess. So at least until that's done, they're not going to have that money. So I don't know. Hopefully we won't have to deal with that. But when I first saw that story, I thought for sure they were going to get their $80 million back. And the judge ruled that they're not getting it back. So,
Oh, I haven't seen that. So, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So if there's nothing else, Mr. Asmani, if you want to go ahead and give us the FY26 budget update.
Sure. I'll start with the operating budget. As you know, of the 9.7, we got the 4%. We are currently working with our schools. The difference between what we had requested to what has been approved so far is about a $14 million gap. And so we're working right now with our school-based budgets to come up with a reconciliation plan. I will say it's very challenging. Our school leaders are doing a phenomenal job, but the reconciliation is quite challenging. We're looking at positions. We're looking at non-personnel expenses. We are exploring grants and what options exist in grants. As you know, this year we have already instituted a hiring freeze in the current year for those non-essential positions. There have been positions that we had planned to hire that we've put on hold throughout the district. We are also looking at other related expenses, furnitures, and those types of things to see where we can slow down the expenditures. The challenge is, even in looking at this budget, is that 85% of our budget is personnel. So there's really not much that you can do there. But we're working through it. We're following up closely on the grant side, working with the grants team to see if there are things, new opportunities that present themselves. So there are a number of things that we're discussing, but it is challenging nonetheless. The Board of Ed presents to the BET on March 20th, and then there is a public hearing on the operating budget on March 26th. And then I believe the BET makes their final operating budget decision. It would be that first Monday in April, I think April 3rd, 4th, I'm not sure right now. And so that's when we will know what the final BET number is that gets forwarded to the Common Council for them to set that final cap and levy. So that's where we are on the operating budget. The capital budget is a bit confusing right now because we're trying to follow a number of things. We had submitted a capital budget request of $7.4 million. The CDCFO had recommended about 6.9. The mayor had also recommended about 6.9 for the Board of Ed, with a total capital budget citywide of about 74. As you may have heard at the last BET meeting, there was conversation about lowering the overall capital budget cap from the 74 million to the 20 million. That kind of caught us off guard because that was something that hasn't happened in a long time. I don't recall, or even seeing that. But in any event, those conversations are ongoing. The capital budget has not been set yet. The line items related to the Board of Ed, so we're watching that closely through the mayor's office and the city finance office. We do go before the Economic and Community Development Committee of the Common Council. They make line item decisions on the capital budget, and that meeting, I believe, we go in April. I believe it's April 4th when we go. So at that meeting, they are the ones who are going to make that line item recommendation to the full council in April. So at the April meeting, we will know where our line item budgets with respect to the capital stand. So right now, there's conversation about an overall cap, but there hasn't been any additional conversation about our individual projects as it relates to the capital budget. So that's what I know as far as the operating and capital budget at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
No
I do
question.
not, but I just looked up that BET meeting on the 20th is on Zoom, 6:30 p.m.
Mhm.
So I'll try to be there.
Okay.
Yep, me too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kara.
Mhm.
So if there's nothing else, ladies, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you,
Seconded.
Linda. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody. Have a good night.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.